Hello and welcome back to Simple Times Studios, where we recount epic campaigns and solo roleplay for your entertainment. Today we're back on the fantastical island of Obojima. Warden has arrived at the village of Tidewater after a fairly rough start to his journey. Between surviving his first fight and delivering Tidewater's mail, Warden is now level 2. He gains the ability Action Surge, and after reviewing his level up, I realized I could have used his last stand talent in that last fight to get one free heal per long rest. Oh well, a lesson learned for later. Someone once told Warden that the seaside village of Tidewater was never the same village twice. As he walked into town, the battered courier could immediately see why. Almost the entire village was made out of sand, maintained by magics that manipulated the very sand beneath Warden's feet. This magic was worked into everything, from the sturdy buildings the locals made their homes, to the flimsy, whimsical sand sculpture that decorated the park in the city square. Finding the Courier Brigade's outpost in the village was easy enough. The local sand wizards had built a small castle with the brigade's crest gently carved into the sand above the entrance. Warden walked in and looked around inside the magically reinforced sand structure. It wasn't particularly large, but then most of the buildings in Tidewater were small compared to the urbanization of Yataman. The enchanted sand produced a weird texture beneath Warden's leather boots as he walked around the building looking for the local postmaster. It felt solid like stone, but it had a grainy quality as he walked over it. The walls likewise had a rough, pale yellow texture to them that the battered fighter wasn't sure he was comfortable with. After all, what was stopping this giant sand castle from collapsing on top of him if the magic ever weakened? But after several minutes of exploring around the building, he found the missing Courier Brigade member camped out behind the building. Seated in front of a small campfire when Warden came over, the local postmaster stood up to greet him. "Hello. Been a while since I saw another member of the brigade. I thought the trouble on the eastern shore required all of our attention." "An aspirant?" Warden shrugged and chuckled. "Yes, I just earned my assignment a few weeks ago. Courier Warden with a delivery. Minato. I've been the postmaster for Tidewater for several years now. What do you think of the sand fort the village gave us?" Minato, the brigade member of Tidewater, introduced with a smile. "I never imagined anything like it back in my home village," Warden replied diplomatically, fairly certain they were both in earshot of the locals. Obojima is full of many wondrous sights, from magic like Tidewater's sand shaping to the wonders of the First Age. Serve long enough with the Courier Brigade and you'll see more than a few of them. Speaking of which, did you bring any postage from Yataman? Minato answered sagely before changing the subject. Warden nodded and hefted up his bag, wincing as the fresh bruises from his previous battle made themselves known. "Ack! Yes, I have mail from Yataman." "Trouble getting here?" Minato asked knowingly. "I was attacked by Yokario on the road into town. They demanded payment. I declined," Warden explained. Minato nodded. "Sometimes it's necessary to stand up for yourself. Violence is always an option, but it's not always the best option." The battered swordsman laughed as he gently rubbed his bruises. "That's certainly true." Minato sat back down to tend to the campfire in front of him. "Either way, you should rest now. We can pass out Tidewater's mail tomorrow." Warden didn't have any reason to argue, so he joined Minato in his camp and let his injuries heal as he rested until the following morning. The next morning, Warden woke up and got to work. Opening his magic mail bag, he conjured the mail for Tidewater before sorting it with Minato inside the brigade's sandcastle office. As Minato turned to pack up outgoing mail, Warden went around town making deliveries. A letter delivery here, a package there. The baker had a pen pal in Yataman. The local herbalist was in a mail correspondence course. The town was full of interesting characters. And the town of Tidewater was an interesting character in itself. Seeing it now again in a better light and at a different time of day revealed a much more energetic atmosphere. The village of Sand really did live up to its reputation. Most of the buildings were square or cylindrical. Regardless of their shape, all of them were short, squat structures that were rarely more than a couple stories tall, sculpted by a combination of powerful magic and trained giant crabs. The few buildings that didn't resemble giant sandcastles were the Tower of Glass in the town's center and the more abstract sand sculptures that the local mystics were constantly building, destroying, and rebuilding as a display of their skills. Yet the strangest sight to Warden's eyes was the giant crabs assisting with the larger construction projects. The courier was in awe at how surprisingly precise the crabs were at pushing and scooping up sand. Though at their size it was easy to mistake some of them as giant boulders when resting. A mistake Warden did not make, though he spotted another outsider doing. The other traveler jumped 1.5 feet when the rock he had rested his foot on to do his bootlaces began to move. The town itself was a buzzing hive of activity as the day wore on and people began to stir. Warden continued to interact with the townspeople as he completed his deliveries, his travel taking him further and further through town. Eventually his route took him towards the beach. He had heard stories of the coastline around the village, how the beach was a magnet for all sorts of strange things that just happened to wash ashore. Today looked like it might be no exception to the stories either. Fishermen either cast their lines and nets from the shore or from boats in the shallow water. Beachcombers dug with trowels or pushed wheeled sand shifters along, while children poked random objects with sticks. Off on the far side of the beach was an open tent where an aha scholar cataloged various curiosities the combers recovered from the shore. Is there anything unusual for Warden to find on the beach? I give it a 50-50, and 82 says no. Is there anyone unusual? Again 50-50, and 34 says yes. Is there any impending danger? Last time, 50-50 again, and 67 says no. He was in the process of completing his last delivery when Warden saw the stranger. The stranger wasn't doing anything in particular to draw attention to himself, just casually pushing a wheeled sand shifter along and occasionally stopping to shift through the sand. Yet something about him just seemed off to the wandering courier for a reason that Warden couldn't quite figure out yet. After giving the aha scholar an envelope full of lab reports from the Yataman branch, Warden walked over to the mysterious stranger. "Hello there. Find anything interesting?" the armored mail carrier asked nonchalantly. The stranger, a human male with brown hair cut short, looked up from his shifter's wire basket. "What? Oh, no, not really. Just some unusual rocks that will look nice in my collection," the strange individual replied, his eyes drifting up towards Warden's brigade cap. "So you're with the courier brigade?" Warden was caught a little off guard by that question, more so by how it was asked. Did the stranger really not know who the courier brigade was? Everyone on the island knew who the courier brigade was. What a strange man. "Yes, I'm Warden, and I'm of the courier brigade. Who are you?" The stranger smiled. "I'm Jerome. I'm not from Tidewater, but I heard it was a great place to do some beach combing, he replied and held out a gloved hand for Warden to shake. Warden shook the offered hand. Strange name and a firm grip. The courier wanted to talk to the stranger more, but he needed to get back to the brigade castle and get the outbound mail for the next leg of his journey. Bidding the stranger goodbye after some idle small talk, he walked away. Okay, Warden is going to make a perception check to see if he notices anything subtle about the stranger. He gets a 19, so yeah, he notices a small odd detail, but has no idea what the significance of it might be. It wasn't until he was almost all the way back to the Courier Brigade's Tidewater office that Warden realized something. Jerome didn't share any of his findings with the AHA tent like everyone else that was combing the beach. Which was odd. AHA liked to keep a catalog of everything that was found on the beach for research purposes. And while showing or donating one's findings was not required, most folks did it anyway. Not doing it was admittedly suspicious, but Warden couldn't think of a good reason to do it, so he filed the detail away for now. There were more important things to focus on, like getting ready to leave Tidewater and make his way to the next village on his route. Okiri Village. End of story.